I'd like to do is just to kind of give everybody context. What we wanted to do is to kind of share your story and some of the key learnings that you've had, Guillaume. What I want to start is by just giving everybody context about who you are, what is checkout.com, a little bit about your journey, and then to dig deeper into some of the key topics. But to give context, usually whenever we organize these sessions, we tend to kind of say, well, when we're interviewing someone, we tend to say, what is that someone really, what do they peak at? So all of our entrepreneurs tend to do really well in everything, but they, different entrepreneurs tend to be really good at, let's say, managing talent or really good at expanding internationally. So the three typical things are access to market, talent, and capital. And, when we're having this conversation as a team for you, we said, well, what is unique about Guillaume is that he managed to do all of them quite well. Whether it's in terms of expanding to multiple markets, whether it's in terms of raising capital, whether it's in terms of kind of really managing talent really well. Maybe just, before we jump into questions, can I ask you to just give everyone a little bit of a background about who you are and your business, just give them context, what does your business do, and just kind of tell us a little bit about your story for, a couple of minutes.
Okay, sure. So first, thanks for having me, Noor. It's always a pleasure to go and help the Endeavor family. I think the one-line summary is that we're a payment processing company, and historically we have focused on large enterprises and some of the world's globest company like Facebook or Netflix. And the reality is that how we get here and how we're different. I think we're different because we decided to, as opposed to work with traditional banks, to build the entire stack. So this is not possible in every region. So typically in the Middle East, banks, you cannot displace them entirely. But in many other parts of the world, from Brazil to Europe to Australia, Hong Kong, Singapore, we can really do an end-to-end payment processing transaction, doing both the financial services and the technology. And we built all of this, and we built all of this over 10 years, more or less. So very often people focus on where the company is now, but I think it was a 10 years journey that started in November 2009, so it's almost actually 11 years now, and that's it. Context on the company, bootstrap from the beginning. We were lucky to work in what is an infinite tab, and we're lucky to have a capital efficient business model, and we were as scrappy as it gets. I think in the beginning of really not paying ourselves a salary and really thinking long term and thinking that if this is a long journey, we want to be very smart with our dilution. We could have gone faster. We decided not to do it, and we basically reinvested every single dollar we were making, and ideally the most efficient way possible, and every single decision. I've said in the press, but it's true. It was really working like this. In the early days of the company, we're like, we can make one hire this month or this quarter. What hire is this going to be? And we would literally have a bit of a council of the 6 employees and saying, hey, who is employee number 7? And then who is employee number 8? And then you go from quarterly to monthly. And now, despite COVID, we hire 15 people a month and 15 people a week. I'm sorry. I added 500 people this year alone. And I think we've tried to keep that mentality. So one thing is that when you grow a company, never forget where you come from. And, it's not because the size has changed or everything has changed that you should change who you were in the first place. Then, because I know it's important to the Endeavor community, 2 big fundraisers, one last year at a $2 billion valuation and one this year at a 5.5, and probably another one very soon, but let's not talk about it today.
Okay. So, just a couple of questions pop up here. So the first question is, so as you were growing your business, there tends to be kind of 2 schools of thought with entrepreneurs when they're running their business. So you have one school of thought that says, I'm going to validate that I have something that's working, and I'm going to raise some funding and accelerate the growth and really optimize for growth and sacrifice profitability for a period of time until whether it's an exit, an IPO or something. And, granted, some companies took that a little too far, but generally there are some entrepreneurs that are doing that, and they have basically control over when they can turn towards profit. And a lot of them have actually started started doing that. The other school of thought is entrepreneurs saying that, well, I don't want to do, I don't really want to raise funding. I want to kind of optimize for profitability. So, I'll sacrifice some growth. I know that you mentioned earlier on that you kind of sacrificed some growth for sustainability, I guess. But can you tell us about, as you were going through the different stages of the company, how did you manage that balance between growth and profitability?
Well, I think the first thing you need to look at, and this is just, and this is a bit of a binary decision, is that do you have a business that is capital efficient? Yes or no? So if I'm basically developing software and I'm ready to not pay myself a salary and I live with my parents, and I can keep building software because I don't really have any hard costs. So I think then you have businesses where you have an inventory cost, you need to basically spend money to make money, or you have a CPA cost to acquire customers. I think at that point in time, you have no choice. You're going to have to raise money anyway. If you put this into under the lens of our business, that's the reason we decided to do enterprise only, because an enterprise basically is an educated sales. I mean, they're going to look at what you have. They believe less in marketing. They believe in technology, features, licenses, and I think that's how our business was steered towards an enterprise instead of doing SMB and self-serve, where you're going to have to spend a lot of money in marketing if you want to compete with Stripe. So I think that's the first thing you really want to kind of put out there, because it's more or less kind of critical. Then the second thing, and now we all have our own personal beliefs. I disagree with the blitz scaling. I know he's an Endeavor board member, and he's a super cool Reid Hoffman, and he's a man of many talents, but I disagree with the model. I think that the model, when you do blitz scaling, yes, you're going to acquire a lot of growth, but most of it is being done inefficiently because you're doing so many things at the same time. I'm not sure you're getting all the learnings that you would have if you're actually very methodical. And I think here there is, again, another tree or another binary decision they need to make. Every entrepreneur, when you build a business, you need to know what you're going to do with it. Some people do build to sell. So I want to build a business, I want to sell it, and I want to start another business on the back of it. Or I want to sell it and become an investor. I hear so many entrepreneurs tell me that when they sell, they want to go, buy side and, start doing VC. I mean, we see it here and even in the region, that happened quite a fair amount of times, and it happens, all around the world. If you're doing a build to keep, which is like, hey, I want to build a business that is generation defying, I want to, make a legacy out of it. I really think that, blitz scaling is not the right approach, because every capital that you raise, it comes at the expense of an dilution. The quicker you raise into your process, the less favorable the terms are going to be, because that's, the more risky your business is to an investor, the more, structured financing they want to do on it. So I think these are the questions you need to answer for yourself. Am I, even if it's before starting, it's like, am I going into a vertical that is cap table efficient, yes or no? And, when I've decided in which vertical I'm operating, do I want to build to sell, or do I want to build to keep? And I want to keep that business. You don't even need to be the one who's going to keep operating. You can actually put a CEO into your place. But the truth is, if you're smart with your equity, you have enough equity to distribute equity to a new management team, considering you want to move on and do something else. And these are the questions you kind of need to answer. For us, we always wanted, it was very simple. When we started Checkout, when we looked at it, let me say, I was in a payments company before, so for me, it was an obvious choice anyway. But the TAM is infinite, so that's the first thing. And having a big TAM, never being constrained by TAM as a total addressable market, is pretty much critical. The second thing is that it had thematic and irrevocable trends that would never change. Is that offline to online is only going into one direction. I don't see people going back offline. Sometimes you'll see if you look at the taxi industry and I see the mobility industry. Yes, Uber is great, but then you have also ton of competition from local authorities and business models. So I think understanding your vertical, and when you found your vertical, finding it's cash flow efficient, and the second thing was what do you want to do with the business? We always wanted to keep. That was decided from the beginning, because there are such good trends. And then it was a matter of just being smart on raising. We always knew we would be raising capital. It's just when is the right time. And I think there's no point in raising capital as long as you actually need money for something, or you need a validation.
So on that topic, without giving away confidential information, but if we go back in time a little more than a year ago, you had a profitable business that was growing at a very healthy pace. You had plenty of cash in the bank, and you had growth. At one point, I remember you telling me that even if your sales team would stop onboarding new people, your company would still grow because your customers continue to grow. So you had a growing business, profitable business, plenty of cash in the bank, and you raised your first round at the $230 million. What made you decide? I know you mentioned that you always wanted to, it was the timing, but what got you to say, okay, this is the time now to raise a funding round?
So I think if you
and then the second one.
Yeah, the answer is let me put it this way. For one Netflix who tells you yes, you have 9 other merchants that tell you you're not big enough, you don't have enough balance sheet for them, because fundamentally, you're still like the financial services partner. So when you buy a Netflix subscription anywhere here in the Middle East, it's going through my bank account before it goes to Netflix. And fundamentally, so you're like a financial partner to Netflix, and as of if you are how do we say this, cost efficient, you still don't make a lot of money. These are profitable businesses, but not insanely. So all your balance sheet is essentially retained earnings, and that not amount to a lot compared to the volume you're doing. The second thing I would say is that we had gone quite far. So at that point in time, we had like 350 employees or something like this. But our ambitions, payment companies require a lot of people. PayPal has like 14 or 15,000 people. Stripe has 3,000. The reality is that there's only so much that we know, and I think that's one of the reasons why we decided to go into the Endeavor network also, is that we are very, we are on a journey, which is a long journey. We're saying it's a build to keep. We want to learn along the way, and what good investors bring you is that they bring you a lot more than just money. They bring you experience, they bring you, a track record of having built company, operational excellence, and, we kind of had realized that we had taken the company very far on our own. We were never against dilution. I want to say this again. It was just a matter of like, when do we do it? And especially the moment we decide to do it, be able to do it on not necessarily our terms, because of course there's negotiation, but on having a better position to negotiate than like the business is struggling. So if it's always easier to raise money when you have a good business.
Yeah, it's easier to raise money when you don't really need the money, so to speak, and your business is much further. So one of the really impressive things about you, Guillaume, is you were very systematic and very thoughtful about picking your investors. And I guess that's partly because, obviously because you waited and until you were in a good position to be able to pick your investors. But a lot of entrepreneurs that are doing their funding round for the first time, that we hear a lot of entrepreneurs saying, well, had I known better, I probably would have picked a different investor or would have approached it in a different way. Can you share with us a little bit about your process or your approach in terms of how you picked your investors? So
one of the first, so there's many things. One of the best advice I ever received in my career, and which I'm going to give them a run right now, is that you should be it was actually Reid Hoffman who gave it to me at dinner with Linda. At one of the board members' dinner of Endeavor. And he said, you'd be stupid to choose an investor based on valuation. You have to choose the people that you want to work with. That's the first. And then you have to choose people that are going to truly care about your business and that are going to be, you need to feel that they're caring. And that's a good feel that you have. When you're raising money, you kind of really get a sense of, is people just deploying cash, or is he actually is he going to care about the business, the idea, the thematic, and everything else? So that's the first thing. The second thing is I always think in terms of dilution. When you run a business that is capital efficient and you raise money for the first time, there's nothing $5 million can do that 2 million can. The reality is that the moment you get 5 million to the bank, you can do it the same, not the same thing with 2, but you will be already able to do a lot with 2. And again, the thing is, I always thought in terms of dilution, which is what is the dilution that I want on this round, as opposed to how much money I want to raise. Because the truth is, with 2 million, you can already do a lot. You can probably run the company for 6 to 9 months, maybe 12 months. You buy yourself some runway if you're doing really well. Then fundamentally it's going to be easy to re-raise money, and your dilution at that point in time, on a weighted average basis will be lower than if I go and raise and I take 25% dilution on Series A. Admittedly, like you said, if you don't need the money, it makes that discussion a lot easier. Even if you're just breaking even, or even if you're like, you still have a way to be kind of almost self-sustainable. The third thing, and this is something I do before every single fundraisers, and that's something that this is something of my own. I basically, I call the equation of value. So I really write down, what am I trying to achieve? Because one thing that, every entrepreneur knows is that raising money is a pretty emotional and intense process. You sleep very little, you have a lot of pressure, you have people that then give you term sheets and you think, hey, I'm getting that term sheet, maybe I'm not going to get something from somebody else. So like, should I sign it, not sign this? There's all these negotiations that happen, and it's like, just like kind of build up. And then you're like, you get this kind of 11th hour where you need to make a decision, and really writing down in a very simple way, what am I trying to achieve? What am I solving for? It's something that I really do. As a matter of fact, I tell my wife also, I always tell her, like, this is what I'm trying to do. And like, when I will come to you, remind me that's exactly what I wanted, because, you will get pressure. And we had, tier 1 funds in the US that were like saying, we were in their office in San Francisco, you have to sign now. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to sign now. I need to think about it. And there's that element that when an investor has built conviction into your business, so he's ready to put a term sheet, he's going to really want to win, and he's going to push you. And I think you need to be smart enough to, kind of really look at all your options, and also get a sense of like, is this the person I want to work with? In our Series A, we had a crazy valuation. It was a very high valuation, but we took, admittedly, it was a 1.88, I think, and versus we had a 2.8. So technically we left $1 billion of valuation on the table. But we did it. The only thing that we did is that we reduced the amount, and we said, I'd rather work with people that I think are good and really care than the guy who gives me the highest price, but then is going to move on and do something else. And that, same thing on the Series B right now. The guy got a bit upset because we had a term sheet for 6.5 billion, and we took the 5.5, because ultimately the Q2 round is a 2.7% dilution. So we didn't want a lot of dilution on that round. We just wanted to bring more smart people to the table. And when some investors are like, hey, I give you a better deal, it's like, it's not a matter of the deal. It's a matter, I want to work with that firm, with that partner. And I think like that's another thing. It's like, you need to go beyond the firm name. There's great firms out there, Sequoia, Accel. We know all of them, but the reality is it's really the partner that matters. It's not so much the firm. So like, we do business with people. We don't do business with companies. And, an investor is well known as like, there's no divorce after this. So the truth is, who you go with, you're stuck with forever. So you better make sure that it's somebody you like working with, because it's not going to be blue sky every day.
And I think you did a lot of back channel reference checks on investors, because, there's one thing in terms of the interactions you've had with them and some of the impressions that you have, but I think you validated that by actually checking with other entrepreneurs that raised money from the investors and said, look, what has been your experience? Is that true? How helpful was that?
Endeavor has been awesome for this. I used Alan Taylor a lot when I was like, hey, from Endeavor Catalyst, I was like, hey, these are all the funds that I like. This is the partner. Can you find me entrepreneurs who actually raise money from these guys? And he organized I think a dozen calls for me. And that was like super helpful, because I think at the end of the day, you need to find the ideal call is like finding a failed entrepreneur for that partner, which is like, hey, I want an investment where things did not go well, so I can find out how that partner was behaving when, things are not great. Did the partner write you off entirely and let you kind of die alone by yourself? Or was he actually trying to be helpful and, and try to help you, go get back on your feet? Because the truth is the best, when everything is fine, I'm not going to say that let me rephrase this. I'm going to use the product like this. The best investors are the ones who care about the companies that are not doing well and that want to help the entrepreneur, that are not just focusing on the winning horses. They're the ones who are going to go and try to, help when you really need when you really need them. I think that's the idea. And here, Endeavor for us is like really awesome. That's it too well, is that you organized like a lot of calls for us all around the world. And I think because it's such an important decision, you don't want to rush it, because again, there's no going back. So take your time, approach people on LinkedIn. There's plenty of scrappy ways to try to get to somebody. And that's it.
Yeah, I think there's an expression that I read somewhere. I don't know if it's a proverb in an Arabic proverb or another culture where they say friends are defined in difficult situations. So it sounds like it's a very parallel process. They're not necessarily going to be your friends, but I think it's a very wise thing to actually look at how investors behave when things are not going well, because that's I mean, I guess you'll need them as much, if not more, when things are not going well compared to when they are going well.
One thing new I have to say
Mhm.
also is that again we have that this is in our DNA, it's even in our core values and our operating principle is that we are super humble to knowledge, and we would never say that we know best. Information and feedback is basically just a data point, and what matters is what you make out of it. And I'm not saying that the model we have works for everyone, because I have CEO friends that tend to be more on the Uber side of like being very driven. They make all the decisions, and they are looking for investors that are going to kind of leave them quiet, so like give me money and move on and do something else because I know best. And I'm not challenging that model. I mean, if you look, it's pretty well documented. Revolut, has built an incredible company in Europe, but the CEO he knows exactly what he wants, Nick, and he's an awesome guy, by the way. But he's a very tough CEO, and he's not a guy who really kind of dialogues with his investors. It's more like it's my way or no way. And I think like here, you need different, I always say to my kids, you need different things in the world to function. So maybe, I think it's also about, before you make a decision, what I would say is that my playbook works for me. You also need to think, who you are as an entrepreneur. I mean, for the people here on the phone, and like, if you're the type of person who, is very, what you want, maybe what you want is then, an investor who's going to give you money, move on to another investment, and, kind of leave you quiet. Because the reality is that worst case scenario, what do you get? You get like a few painful hours every quarter when you have a board meeting. That's another thing you need to put into perspective. So, I mean, it's like, like I say, we're all different to that.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think I guess from our interaction with entrepreneurs, we hear it a little too often where entrepreneurs tell us that the relationship they end up having with investors, and this is a global thing, we're not talking just the UAE, where they say, well, our investors were kind of helpful a little bit at the beginning, but then, the relationship turned into, as an entrepreneur, it's my responsibility to come with a strategy and kind of go to the board and kind of get their blessing on it. And we get scrutinized on the financials a lot. So where some entrepreneurs, they feel that, I wouldn't say they're on their own, but it's kind of really leveraging the investors to help them kind of craft a strategy and address issues. They feel there's a gap there. But I think it's quite, it makes a lot of sense. If the entrepreneur wants that, then it's great. But if the entrepreneur wants to leverage other people and their experience and their insight. So I'm going to continue. I have a whole bunch of other questions. I think if anybody has any questions, you can feel free to type them up in the chat, and we can take questions as we go along. I have enough to fill 5-hour interview. Not that we're going to do that, but if we shift over to talent, because again, going back, the issues that entrepreneurs tell us that they tend to face are access to capital, access to markets, access to talent. And by far, the biggest issue that entrepreneurs have is talent. And that that's a beast with multiple heads, so to speak, whether it's in terms of getting the right people, whether it's in terms of managing the team to make sure that they're, that the organization is running the right way, or in terms of, people leaving the organization. So maybe, I don't know if you're comfortable to talk about this, but I think one interesting thing that you had shared with me was that at one point you hired the CEO for checkout.com, and you kind of stepped into kind of doing more of the technical work, but then you went back. Is it something that you'd be okay to talk about, to kind of take us through that?
Absolutely, talk about it. So one of the core values of our company is that we're a true meritocracy. So the best person gets the job. So there's no glass ceiling. We always said that from the beginning. The current CTO was a front-end engineer, and he took the job of the previous CTO, and he knows that if he's not the best one at the job, somebody might take his job one day. And I'm making that as an example, but it's the reality is that, let me say the best CEOs are the ones that create consensus in their company. So they're able to, tell the mission, define a mission, and then basically push it down to every single levels of the hierarchy. And they're ones that are basically to attract and hire talent. That's the reality. This is like really critical. For us, the way we did it is to always have super open conversations and saying that everyone has a clear career path, which is that they can get any job in the company if they're the most capable of doing it. And like this is, we had that from day one in the company, especially when we were 5, and we were like, hey, this is how our company is going to operate, because the moment you have politics and people think that, hey, I cannot get the top job, or I'm actually blocked here in my progression, they're going to start looking elsewhere. And if you invest in people, I mean, people always talk about hiring people, but the truth is there is an even bigger cost in losing people that are quality, that have ramped up and really know your business well and adding value on a day-to-day basis. You cannot afford to lose these people. Then for us specifically, what happened is that in 2012, at the end of 2012, we received our FCA license in the UK. So basically, we're a payment institution. We're a financially regulated company. At that point in time, we only had a payment gateway. And what I decided to do is that I was like, do I want to run the financial side and really a bit of a CEO/COO and all operation execution? Or do I want to go and build technology? Because fundamentally, I'm a product guy at heart. That's what I enjoy doing, or enjoyed, because I think I have to put that in the past. And we were lacking in terms of product. I decided to pivot because I was like, I'm not the person to basically interact with regulators, write policies and things like this. Yes, it's the top job and to making all these decisions in terms of structuring the company. And the company really needed unification of product and technology. So I went on to build this for 3 years. I took back the CEO role. The combination of the current CEO was no longer good enough. And I think that at some point when you really start growing the company, a founder-led company usually works best as well. People are always questioning why are you not the CEO? And we found an agreement with Mathieu, and he moved on to something else. The reality is that, again, I think there is no real formula or playbook. I mean, every company is different. What I will say though is that you will get the best talent if they really feel. It's not a question of compensation, that I'm a firm believer. It's a question of giving the accessibility to career path. Is people have to work on stuff that they find interesting, and they have to think that by working here, they're never going to be kind of limited by some, excuse me, but admin BS, and that they're that everything is possible. And if you're able to convey that and do that properly, then fundamentally, I think people are probably going to be more excited to work for you or work for the company.
You just gave me 10 questions to ask, but maybe I'll take a step back, I think, just before we move. So I think one of the challenges that a lot of entrepreneurs face is that at some point, they have great people in the organization, and the organization outgrows those people. So whether it is a senior person or someone who's just a really, really good executor in a role, and you just need someone who's a little bit more senior. And the ideal scenario is that they can grow those people to kind of take on more and more responsibility. But sometimes there's a tough realization where an entrepreneur feels that the organization has outgrown that person. And in some cases, the entrepreneur finds it quite difficult because they find, there's a sense of loyalty because this person helped us get to where we are. They feel almost this sense of loyalty. A lot of the times they're close, they become very close friends. I'm sure that has happened with you. If you can share with us a little bit more on your experience there and some of the learnings that you've had there.
So I think, of course, it happens. It happens in all companies. I mean, we say like this: sometimes the performance of an individual are outgrown by the ambitions of the company. That's the way we look at it. And the reality is that if I look at my own head of people from 2 years ago or 3 years ago, amazing girl. She worked like crazy, 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. She put her heart and soul in the company, except that she was not good enough anymore for where we were trying to go. And she had a very kind of motherly approach to the company because she had been there from the beginning. So she wanted to give her opinion everywhere. And what was simple discussions were turning into complex discussions. And we needed somebody that was, I don't want to use the word more clinical, but somebody that was able to make, short and quick decisions, because when you lead a fast growth company, it's all about making quick decisions because there's only so many hours into the day. So we basically decided to let her go. And the reality is that, I mean, we, as a CEO, you always have tough decisions, but how you behave, you know, basically drives a lot about how people are going to perceive you. And like, when you let somebody go, it's about treating that person, you know, properly. And that was somebody that, you know, we let her keep all her vested equity. We gave her 3 years of salary. We decided to really make an example of like taking care of somebody in the most optimal way possible. Even if the 3 years of salary were really costing us, you know, probably 2 more salaries of people we could have hired, but it was the right thing to do for somebody who had given so much to the company. I think that's the right thing. And, you know, in companies, people talk. So like how you behave is super important. And I think you know more about a company, or about a person from the difficult decisions that he makes than the good decisions. You don't tell about a CEO. It's not about raising money that makes you a good CEO. What makes you a good CEO is like being able to hire people and basically fire people, and what the people that fired you think of you. The same way that we were discussing about, you know, the investor. I raised money from that investors. Things did not go well, but the investor was a gentleman till the end and was like always good to me. I think the same thing applies to a CEO, 100%. And you know, as a CEO, no sugarcoating. You're going to have a lot of tough discussions with a lot of people throughout the years. If anything, I'm discussing to one of the most senior people that we work right now. He's top 5 in the company, and he fired more than 2,000 people. We're discussing this, and yet you speak to all the people that he has fired, and all of them would tell you that he's amazing. And you know, you have to make. It's about how, you know, building consensus, explaining why you do things, and then doing them with I don't want to say with grace, because it's not the right way to put it, but at least not taking advantage of a situation. Because if you take advantage of the situation, you'll always know, and that will backfire for you. That I'm 100% positive.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about your kind of in terms of your recruitment process as you've been growing as an organization? How has that evolved, and in terms of hiring people into the organization? Because, you know, in the early days, the business is very dependent on you as the founder kind of leading the way. But the bigger the organization gets, the more important it becomes to make sure that the team as a whole is really on the right people in the right seats, so to speak. Can you tell us a little bit about your process, your recruitment process, your hiring process, particularly for your senior talent, and overall in the organization, how you've adapted that?
So there's a few things. We do everything internally, so we never use recruiters ever. And that was another decision that we decided in the beginning. We were like, we'd rather take more time. We'd rather fail many times, but we want to do everything internally because nobody can better pitch the company than we do. That's the start. And so we built a recruitment team. We spend a lot of time with them to try to really, like, you know, how do you position the company? The second thing I would say is that we are very systematic. And yes, typically for engineers, we built the test. We put people through the test. You know, and like, funny enough, we're hiring a VP of engineering right now. The guy is a superstar. He managed like 1,200 engineers in very famous tech companies globally. And we told him, hey, you have to take the test. And so funny enough, like there's people who tell you, oh, I'm a VP of engineering. I don't need to take the test. I'm like, you need to take the test like everyone else. If you don't want to take the test, go get a job elsewhere. And I think like this is, you know, like we would never deviate from what we think are the processes that have created value. And I think, again, every company is different. Funny enough is like, I think a lot of it, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs focus on like, let's build revenue, let's do this, let's do that. And sometimes what you should really focus early into your company, you know, it's like, how do I run the company? So what is my operating principles? What is operating cadence? You know, how do I hire people? How do I retain people? You need to write all of this down. I think like, you know, like the, what you call the Endeavor retreat, is we had like a retreat in the early days at Checkout once a year where the whole management team sits together and we have all these things kind of written down. And as a matter of fact, all the people you see in the back is my management company, is all my management team, because we have right now the strategy days. So like a lot of them have flown into Dubai and we're having this, we do it twice a year now, where we sit down and we review everything that we have, all our kind of management playbooks. And for recruitment, it's probably one of the first things that you want to do. I mean, a tech company is going to run differently than a food delivery company and others. So write down what works for you. And then you just iterate from it. You're like, you know, every season is like, hey, I mean, that's how we did. How the company is evolving. Should we change these things? But then you stick to the plan. I mean, a good strategy and clean execution always wins at the end of the day. I mean, that's the one thing. And very often you're tempted to go and say, hey, I have all these things and my inbox is building up like crazy. And like, I need to go and win that account, or, that's would be for us. I need to do this thing that is going to unlock value. I disagree with that. We are super methodical and super strategic in our thinking, and we have playbooks for everything, and we take the time to write them, and then we just execute against them, and we change them as we, based on data.
It's very Swiss of you.
It works.
Yeah, it works really well. So in terms of, I guess one of the things that, one of the complexities that entrepreneurs eventually deal with is when they start setting up in multiple offices. The first time they set up another office, there's a learning curve there in terms of hiring local talent and kind of dealing with people being remotely away from each other. But for you, that's kind of on the nth scale because you're operating in at 4 continents now, or?
Yeah, we have 14 offices right now, and we keep adding now, 5, 6 a year. The reality is that this is, again, everyone has his own way of doing things. For us, the way we look at it, and I was saying we were talking about the importance of hiring, the first 2, 3 hires in every single office are the most important. So this is where you really want to, very often people think, oh, I need to open that country as soon as possible. They go and hire a recruiter and say, hey, find me a head of country to do that. And that's where I would technically say, and that's maybe the blitz scaling approach. I'd say that's not the right, for us, that wasn't the right approach. Our approach is to say hey, first of all, if we have somebody that we really trust within the company, we tend to send them. So that's how we opened Brazil. That's how we opened Porto, which is somebody who's in the head office in London wants to go back home, says, hey, I'm going to go and be the first person. And we have a good, and he doesn't need to be the head of country. He's going to be employee number 1, head of local operations or whatever you want to call it. He helps putting the pieces together. And then usually, and this, for me, that's why I was traveling so much, I like to be involved in all the first hires in the country, because if you have the right people, there's a snowballing effect. If you don't have the right people, then you ultimately build something, you don't really see that it doesn't work. And then 1 year later, you start seeing that it doesn't work and you just lost a ton of time. So again, I think that, being quite methodical there in the beginning and really, having the good instinct on the people is the most important.
So, I guess instinct is important, but can you tell us a little bit about the values that you look for, or whether it's the values, or I guess there's skill sets that's taken depending on the job, but if you can give us a little bit more insight specifically for your company, what are kind of almost the check boxes that you're looking for when you're hiring, whether it's the first few hires or, whether it's in your own office, kind of key things that you look for that are kind of, if everything else checks and this one doesn't work, then it's a no-go. Can you tell us a little bit more about the process specifically of your company?
Yeah, you're going to think I'm an entire complete geek, but at the end of the day, we have a playbook for that as well. First of all, we have what we call our Culture Scorecard. So we have a lot of traits of character that we know work at checkout, and that's 10 years of experience. And the fact of being humble, hardworking, scrappy, to go and lend a hand to other people. So we have all these things on the scorecard. Funny enough, being super methodical and hiring is super important. And there's plenty of materials out there of how Google hires and how the biggest companies hire. And it's annoying to do it on the during the interview and especially after, because funny enough, if you have at checkout, if I do 1 hour of interview, I have 2 hours of homework on the back of it about all the things that I need to fill in. So it's not the interview that takes a lot of time, it's all the post work that you need to do in the memos. And we use Lever, which is a applicant tracking software. And the reality is that we have a personal scorecard, and then we have what we call a competency profile, and then we just score everyone. And that's how we make decisions at the end of the day. And the truth is, it's for us, that model works pretty well. Like everyone, we make bad hiring decisions. Don't get me wrong. But one of the things that we always try to say is that I will always put the culture in front of the true competency, because sorry to put this, if you have somebody who's not well-spirited, but he's really good at what he does, it usually never works. At least not in our company. We're not that type of company. We're a company where somebody who would be not well-spirited, but is very good, it wouldn't gel.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. because I guess that also protects you. Having a systematic approach protects you from having a confirmation bias, where you might like the person and then start to kind of justify kind of red flags. So we have a couple of questions that
you were asking me just for advice and for how we do also. One thing, because I'm doing it right now, we have 2 C-level positions open that we're actually hiring for. I always do the first interview, which is actually not an interview, and which is something where I basically it's basically because I do these now all the time, so it takes a fair amount of time. Is that before I even put people into an interview process, we have the first part is I tell them about the opportunity of checkout, and then all the problems that we have. Like literally, I'm like it's a long list of problems. In an interview, you should be telling the truth. It's a two-way street, and if you hire a guy, like I say, a VP of engineering, it's like we have failed here, we've made the wrong decision there. My event streaming technology was Kafka, and now I'm on Kinesis, and the cost of making the wrong decision has slowed us down, and we're scaling too fast, blah blah blah. And I think that's super important. The second part is a very human conversation. So and really about who do they look up to. What values do they want to give to their kids? I have all sorts of questions that I like asking that have nothing to do with business, and really about the human being. And then the third part of the conversation is usually them asking questions, and you can tell a lot about the question that somebody asks you, about what type of profile they are. Is the guy all about compensation, money, and how much equity he's going to be getting, or is he more thoughtful? And based on this. I always do this in the beginning, because what I don't want is to have somebody who's not well-spirited, and then it waits, you go for then 7, 8 interviews, which is a long process that takes a lot of time to the management team and to some other key parts of the personnel, for somebody who's not worth it, where it's going to clash. So I think even if it's this, you can do in 45 minutes. I usually do 45 minutes, 3 times 15 minutes, or 15, 15, 15 for the 3 buckets.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to start reading out some of the questions that came in, and if there are other questions, we'll open up the floor for them. So we have a question from Tobias asking, you spoke about a small business versus enterprise at the beginning. Was the decision of focusing on enterprise take it on day one, or did it evolve over time based on the market response?
So it evolved over time. Originally, we had an approach which was like, hey, let's build a platform for everyone. And then what we realized is that if we wanted to hit SMBs in general, we would have to do marketing. And in the early days, we had no marketing money, because marketing is obviously, we had zero for marketing. So it was a bit of how do we say this? It was not by design. It was just a result of the strategy. And we were like, if I make an extra dollar, I'd rather go and hire 1 engineer. And in the early days of the companies, you have the numbers. Our headcount was really growing slowly. I mean, we had 15 employees for 1 year, and then we had 20 employees for another year. So we were very kind of methodical there, and there was zero money for marketing. And because there was zero money for marketing, we were like, if we fight with Stripe in Europe, we got zero chance. And so fundamentally, let's go and talk to enterprise, because a large merchant, a very smart, educated, head of payments, he doesn't care about the Stripe logo. He cares about feature sets, data streams, and payment performance. And these are all things that are very factual. And that's how we ended up doing only enterprises, essentially.
Okay. Then we have another question from Saman asking, a common rationale for fundraising is expansion related to being first to market. How important is that to you, and do you feel variables startup weighs out the significance of that?
We are second to market in every single, let's say there's no market that we have opened. What I do think is that when you go and do an international strategy, there's going to be different kind of thesis for the markets you enter into. Either because, you can move into that market in a very capital efficient way. So I can basically transpose my service there and it doesn't cost me too much money. Either you're going to do it because it's strategic for the equity value. I need to be in the US because ultimately the US for me is the biggest e-commerce market. I'm never going to make any money, but I need to be there anyway. Or you do it because you can deploy capital there and win, be a number 1 or number 2 position. And I think this is the one that is the most important, and why we came to the UAE. We could run the UAE in a capital efficient way. When we arrived here, there was NI, there was a Payfort, there was the other guys there, I forgot their name, but there was another PSP back in the day. They kind of disappeared since. And I think we were like, we can enter into that market and in a relatively capital efficient way, create a leader or a second position. Here we, as a matter of fact, created a leader. And I think that that's how we look at it. You can then go and decide to raise a ton of money to enter to 10 markets at the same time. But I will go back and say the same thing I was saying before. I'd rather do 2-3 markets very well on the money that I have raised, and if it's less money, win those markets and then go raise more money after, because as long as you have momentum, raising money is actually possible. That's the reality. And the other thing is that if you do too many markets at the same time, then you have an exponentially complex problem to solve, because in being an entrepreneur, and everyone here in the room knows it, is you basically deal with like problems and bad news every day. So I mean, the more markets you're dealing with, and like the more problems you have to deal with. So I mean, the truth is like set yourself for not necessarily success, but like less problems to solve, or I guess you can solve them faster.
Yeah, I think I usually I look forward to kind of our catch-up meetings every once in a while. The things that really stuck with me, one of the conversations we had, is how you look at your role as a CEO. At one point, you were kind of telling me that the way you see your role as a CEO is you unblock, you can remove blockages in the organization. And you're talking to me about how as the organization grew, you also have your chief of staff that you hired on board. But can you maybe tell us about that? Because I found that to be one of those kind of light bulb moments where you're kind of telling me about that. Could you share a little bit more about that, and over time how that evolved?
Yeah, so I mean, I will go back to what I said before. Being a good CEO is building consensus. So it's very important you align everyone all the time, and I really believe into that. So like because especially as your company is growing, and it's being able to help people hire, and it's maybe people that are hired to you, or maybe people that are hired below you. I mean, the truth is sometimes I'd write an email on LinkedIn to somebody who's not going to report to me and say, hey, I'd love to go and we'd love to start speaking to you because you'd be relevant in the organization there, and this type of thing work. The consensus thing is what I was telling about solving problems, is that as a good CEO is a catalyst for his business. So he's basically supposed to unlock value, or unlock growth. So there's more growth and more value being created. And even in the way I run my one-to-ones with all my direct remits, every week I speak to every single of my direct remits, and they have 1 hour where they can basically complain, rant, bring me problems to solve. And what I bring them is I bring them the helicopter view of like, I see everything that happens at checkout, and I try to, kind of help them into their mission. A good leader helps others, and that I really believe into it. What's true is that you're not the same CEO at 300 people than you are at 1,000 people like we have right now, because the reality is that it's your ability to be granular becomes harder and harder. And instead of being, tactical, which is like, everything that is happening in the company, what moves what, you become more and more strategic. And fundamentally, like you start having like a really kind of a big picture vision. I will say one thing. I think the best CEOs are people that are both like super strategic. So they have a global vision. They know where they bring the company. But at the same time, they still know the tiniest details of the company, and they're able to zoom in, zoom out super quickly, because that will make people kind of follow you, and that's how you kind of build consensus. In terms of the chief of staff, which we kind of discussed, this is something that Insight had pushed for me. And funny enough, I took a failed entrepreneur, which was like a very smart person, but so she had the operating experience. She was COO in a blockchain company, and incredibly smart. And there is like, when I don't have the time to zoom in, I send her, and we really have a trust relationship. So I can get her like go super thorough on something where I don't have the time. So it's almost like, and it's really a intellectual sparring partner, which is like, hey, I have that problem. I think that's the solution. Can you go and check for me? And like, and that problem could be what the CFO is bringing up to me, or the CTO. It's like, it's not problems that I create myself. It's just more like, what is being relayed to me through the one-to-ones. And I think like this is again, for me, it was immensely value add. It just works really well.
That's great. So, and I mean, you mentioned the CFO. I think that's one of the things that also comes up a lot, because that's obviously a very important role in the organization. Some people kind of refer to the CFO as the handbrake in the company, because entrepreneurs tend to be by nature very optimistic, where the CFOs are the people that kind of come in and really ground them and kind of make sure that they don't drive the business off a cliff. Can you tell us a little bit more about your experience working with the CFO, and how you define that healthy relationship when you
So
have the
we have
right person?
Toma and I, we have an awesome relationship. Because we've been together for 7 years. So when we were there when there was like 50 people, so I mean, we've been through the ups and downs of the business. The second thing I will say is I don't think there is a perfect CEO template, because ultimately the the CFO is very much of a reflection of the CFO. And I almost say like an opposite reflections. You're going to have CEOs that are, like you say, super dreamers, super forward looking, and that's good because they create consensus and they want to get the whole company to follow that mission. But then you need like a bit of a, like it's in the investor, but like you want to have an insurance that things are going to the right direction, because let's say that crazy CEO is not looking at the numbers. So like they need to kind of match each other. So I think like, and this is not only CFO, it's like most of the time you want to find in your partners in the management team what you're not yourself. So it's like people who bring qualities that you don't necessarily have. What's for sure is that a good CFO is a key hire, and like it's not something you should keep for later. It's not because being smart with money, and it goes back to the thing of like, if everything is a function of yield, and it's always about like, how do we spend money optimally? How do we allocate our resource optimally? You want to have a CFO you can trust entirely. And, it's like from budgeting to making sure that people are, there's a huge, it's a huge remit, and it's not only, a CFO is not only fundraising, it's like every day how you run the company. And I think like, yeah, I mean, I'm blessed because it's one of the CFO is one of the roles that Thomas here, I'll keep him forever. We just work super well together. We are, we want to do the journey together, 100%.
That's great. Does anybody have any questions? I have plenty more, but just want to make sure that I'm not hogging it from everyone. I think one of the questions that came before that's very specific to your industry is, obviously as an entrepreneur, you're also looking at, you're dealing with a lot of risk. So one of the questions is, what is the main or the biggest risk that you're facing, or that you need to kind of handle as you're operating such a large scale payment gateway, and how do you manage that?
So, I mean, there was the question before about why doing enterprise versus SMB. It's surprising, but there's a lot less risk with enterprises than there is with SMBs. Because with enterprises, your merchants, you see their financials, you have good counterparts. And unless you're doing future services like travel or things like this, that can be affected by kind of macro events like we had with COVID, and you can have, chargebacks and everything that goes with it. A large enterprise is a much better counterpart than, a million small merchants, because small merchants go out of business. There is churn and everything. And that was when we built our business. That was one of the other reasons why we decided to go for enterprise only, because it was much easier we have a lot less counterparts. So we just have a lot less merchants. Still to this day, I have only 1,400 contracts. If you look at a company like Adyen, the Dutch company, and it's now a $55 billion market cap, they have 4,000 contracts. So the reality is that, to go from where I am to where Adyen is, there's about 2,600, 2,500 merchants difference. And funny enough, I know every single of those merchants. And what is the likeliness of, we have Adidas as a merchant. What is the likeliness of Adidas going bankrupt? It's pretty small, to be honest with you. Problems can happen, but the truth is that's why you work with large companies. SMBs, on the other hand, yes, you will have a diversified risk from and the risk of revenue concentration. I have my biggest merchant is 10% of my revenue, which is a lot. But the reality, so if I'm full SMB, I don't have that. But then you have the credit risk of having merchants going out of business, and this is where you need to have very smart algorithms and have a lot more roles on these merchants.
Yeah. And then kind of shifting a little bit on market access. So you spoke about going into new markets. The first few hires are really important. Can you tell us a little bit more about your playbook, or your kind of your methodology for picking which markets you're going to go to, and beyond hiring people, what are kind of the key things that you look for or learnings when you're going into new markets?
So for us, I have a strategy team, which we had invested in quite early as well. There's two things we have invested way sooner than most of the competitors. Is that A was a big people team, everything from culture to how we run the company, and because it's really my people team that works on operational excellence, operational cadence, and things like this, and strategy. And when we decided with strategy, which was like, if we have, it's always these questions like, if we have to expand, how do we expand? Which country do we go to? And it's not because it's a neighboring country or because it looks easy. We kind of, here we're like hyper methodical in terms of like, there's three things I told you before is that, can I go there in a capital efficient way? Like say, for instance, Saudi, the UAE can sell into Saudi. We now have a Saudi office, but it took us some time to have the Saudi office. It was all done on a cross-border basis. So I was adding a geography without doing anything, essentially, other than like obviously negotiating contracts with SAB and things like this. Is it strategically important from an equity value perspective, which is I need to be there even if I don't make money, or is it a market in which I can win? And that's the question. I mean, this is specific to our industry. For instance, we have all the big food delivery guys in the region, and actually nobody now. They maybe think differently. I wouldn't know what is important to your business, but you always have to ask yourself, how do I create the most value? Or what creates value for me? Because one thing we'll say, and we didn't say this before, is that when you go into when you raise money, whatever people say or think, I mean, people give you money to create value in exchange for that. And when the moment you have that handshake, there's no going back. So whatever you promise on your financial plan and your business plan, you're gonna have to deliver. And that's one thing I'd say is that going back, I very often, and I heard an entrepreneur told me this the other day, hey, always put 20% more in your financial planning because the investors are going to discount it. I'd rather put something that I know I'm going to deliver and raise less money because I don't get the valuation that I want because I think in terms of dilution, than just trying to get maximum amount. And I think like that, never forget that the moment you got that handshake and actually that term sheet with an investor, those numbers you're gonna have to deliver on them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we have a final question from Martin. What drives you? What deeply drives you? Which is a very philosophical, very deep question, but I think that's a very appropriate one for you.
There's two questions that appear there, so I'm going to finish with what drives you. The work-life balance is getting better thanks to COVID because I'm traveling less. I saw that there from an enterprise. Thanks to COVID, I'm basically here in the UAE almost all the time now, and sometimes I go to the US, but mostly that's it. And what drives me is that we have an incredible chance to really build a big business that is touching billions at this point in time. And we process billions of e-commerce transactions every year. This year will be more than $1 billion. Next year will probably 3 or 4 billion. So in a way, when you look at how many, and this is the amount of transactions, not the dollar value. And so we're building something that is here in the UAE, for instance, we touch you, for instance, Noor, probably at least once a day. And you don't know it. And we don't want to be known. We don't want to be like, we don't want to be PayPal or like being a high profile company. But it's immensely rewarding to build something that is now at this point, we're building a legacy and building a generation defined company. These are the things that so in the all hands meeting, we always say that we're all big video games players. It's a side note, but like that there's video games always in all the company, in every single office. And we say that we play the infinity game. It's like, how do we build something? This is what we solved for. How do we build something that is going to stay well beyond us? That when you leave, you've contributed to something that is self-sustainable. And when you have a small companies, it's always like the individualities that make a company. This guy is awesome, and he helps the company, every year, every month, whatever. And what we're trying to do is to build a company where it's the company as a whole, the processes, the sum of the parts that makes the company move, not one guy or something like this. And that's an immense drive for me because, like I say, 2 years ago, I was the CEO of a 300 people company. And now there's 1,000 people, and next year we had 900 people, more or less. So the truth is, these are new challenges, and it's like, again, the quality of the people we work with also is different. And that's like, at the personal level, at an intellectual level, it's immensely rewarding to sit with Facebook and saying, hey, how do you want to go and enter? As a matter of fact, they're like Guatemala or like really hard to reach countries. That's like challenging, interesting, and it's a huge positive for me. And the other thing is, I work with awesome people. We have a great company culture. It's like, it's not only about your Glassdoor ratings. People love to, people buy into the mission. And, when you come to the office, because this is not a build to sell, it's to build to keep, we've kind of built a lifestyle, and it makes it immensely rewarding. That's why my wife has to deal with me being mostly in the office all day, despite COVID and everything. I'm still here every day. I like the routine. I think that's what it is.
That's amazing. I think also a fun thing that came out was when you were doing the international selection panel. I think one of the discussions that came up is that you have in your mind a plan for in the long term for related to insurance. I don't know if it's something that you'd want to share.
So the insurance thing, that was like, so we always thought that the payment model was broken and that insurance is broken as well. I think that here we have changed, we had to pivot a little bit because ultimately it's like, laser focus is very important, and Elon Musk manages to run two businesses at the same time. I don't know how he does that. I mean, between my 3 kids, my wife, and then the office, there's no way I start another business. So that's like now guaranteed. So the insurance things, I mean, yes, the insurance world is completely broken. There's a lot of people that are looking at insurtech, and fundamentally, because it's a bit similar to what happens into payments, when there's a lot of intermediation, so there's a lot of people that stack on top of each other between the person who takes the money and the person who receives it, or like, between the claim and the insurance and how it's operating, it's ripe for disruption. I think that's the way we look at it. But no insurance company anytime soon. No, I think I have a lifetime.
We'll leave that for another time then. But just to be respectful of your time and everybody's time, Guillaume, it's always a pleasure to speak to you and to hear your thoughts about your about life and your business. Thank you so much for taking the time, and it was a real pleasure speaking to you.
Anything for the Endeavor family, no, and for you. Thank you so much. See you later.
Thank you, Guillaume. Bye-bye.